When archaeologists and anthropologists of the future exhume your grave and look at your remains, they will declare you male or female.
Well, bottom line is, when they dig up your bones one day, they're not going to look at your bones and go, ah, here lies a gender fluid two-spirit Apache helicopter. They're going to say either a man or a woman.
At the end of your life, when you are dead and gone and been buried and they dig up your bones, they will look at the pelvis and go, that was a man, that was a woman.
1,000 years, archaeologists will dig up your male bones.
Archaeologists have literally dug up corpses.
They dig up your bones. When they go dig up your bones.
When they dig up your bones.
1,000 years from now, they dig up your bones.
Dig up your bones.
That is male DNA. That is female DNA.
These are the bones of a female. These are the bones of a male.
And I don't care what you feel like. And I don't care what you cut off or have put in or whatever. If you were to die 100 years from now, they could dig up your bones, and every bone, every cell in your bones would be saying that's a female or that's a male, and it doesn't matter how you feel. And anybody who says anything contrary to that has lost their ever-loving mind.
I want to call this the dumbest form of transphobia that I know of, but I'm pretty sure all transphobia is justified by transphobe using similar pseudoscience and shitty logic, so I don't actually think it is. I think it's just on par with the stupidity of the rest of it. Now, I have a degree in archaeology, and I can tell you that that's not how archaeologists look at gender. What I can't tell you is how far back we can see, like, transness within the archaeological record, which means, in my mind, I can only, like, half outsmart this argument, which is frankly fucking unacceptable. So, over this weekend, it's now Saturday morning, I've got to work on Monday, so we've got to get it done this weekend. Let's figure out how far back we can see transness within the archaeological record. I'm making everything worse, and I might quit. So gender in archaeology. Now there's two things before we start. One is that I only have a bachelor's degree. If somebody comes along saying they've got a master's or a PhD in bioarchaeology, you should probably trust that fucker before you trust me. Second is I'm going to use some specific terminology. When I'm talking about the sex of a body, that is the biological characteristics, like sexual characteristics. So you're looking at chromosomes, you're looking at technically reproductive organs, but most of that kind of dissolves away, breaks down before we get to them. But we're also looking at skeletons, right? That's referred to sex, that is specifically sex, male and female and intersex, right? Like that is specifically those terms. Now when we're talking about gendered identities and roles and expressions. When we're talking about gender, we will use terms like man and woman, non-binary, all of that. That all comes to terms when you're talking about gender, less when you're talking about sex. Gender does change between times, between societies, you know, where you are in the world, when you're looking at, all of it will change gender. Gendered identities, gendered roles, gendered expressions, all of it. The best way to study it, especially within archaeology, is debated. It's a very active and ongoing conversation, let's say. Butler, for example, says gender is...
Gender is a mix of cultural norms, historical formations, family influence, psychic realities, desires and wishes, and we have a say in that.
I'm going to read the others off my laptop. The World Health Organization has a little bit more of a rigid view of gender than Butler does. So they kind of say, gender refers to the characteristics of women, men, girls and boys that are socially constructed. This includes norms, behaviours and roles associated with being a woman, man, girl or boy, as well as relationship with each other. Which again, is a lot more rigid, it's very binary, but they do go further down the text to acknowledge trans people, gender variance, that kind of thing. As a social construct, gender varies from society to society and can change over time. Gender interacts with but is different to sex. Rigid gender norms negatively affect people with diverse gender identities who often face violence, stigma and discrimination as a result, including in healthcare settings. Now before you sit there and you're like,
oh my god, everyone's gone off the deep end with this gender and sex stuff.
No one is saying that gender and sex isn't linked. No one is saying that there are roles within society, either now or in the past, that are based on someone's sex. Sometimes even forced upon you by society based on your sex. No one is saying that sociosexual roles and sex doesn't exist or doesn't play a factor into how you experience gender. All people are saying gender, sex are different. That allows us to study them differently, which is very, very important. Now, there are three main things that an archaeologist will look at when looking for gender in someone. This is both when you dig someone up from the ground or when you're like looking at a larger cultural context. That is the sex of the body, that is the grave goods, and that is any historical context, right? It's what's in the hole with you, and what people have written about from the time you can. Super simple. But none of them are perfect, and they can all be very tricky at times. So what archaeologists do is they look at all and try and piece together things. I will also say we can't look at any complete identities, but we can look at roles and expressions, that kind of thing. So, the difference between sex and gender is all well and good, but how do we see evidence for transness in the archaeological record? And I mean, I don't know. My best guess is either a clearly defined gender system that correlates with sex and then looks for breaks in those, or just kind of look for a gender system where biological sex doesn't matter at all. Either way, I've got some reading to do. This is the part of the video that you guys don't often see, and apart from the editing, which takes a fuck of a long time, this takes the longest. So much time goes to the research part of one of these videos, so if you are enjoying my videos, please consider liking and subscribing. We're taking this boy to the beach, and we're doing that because two things kept popping up while I was doing my research. The first is that by looking for evidence of transness in the past, what we're doing is basically making current gender systems and the current binary, the current patriarchal way of thinking, we're making that seem normal, which is presentism and not what we want at all. It just fucks with our data and it fucks with our knowledge of the past. Hi, baby. Hi, your breath stinks. Well, no, thank you. The second, and what that does basically is that makes all of the oppression that the current gender systems that we have seem normal. Can I have my hand back, hon? I need to drive. Thank you. Like those have always been the case. That is the way of things. It makes that like trans people are the odd ones because we're looking for like, you know, no, thank you. We're looking for like gender binary and the breaks in that and whatever. So basically, TLDR is I'm making everything worse and I might quit.
What a sweet, sweet mess. It's a sweet, sweet mess. We're making here, but I would do it again. Oh, the sweet, sweet mess. What a sweet, sweet mess. But I would do it all again. Love turns into fear, and it won't just disappear.
Hi. So we've decided to have one more look. Although the kind of identity and idea of being trans is only about 100 years old, give or take, it explains and describes a universal experience. Not universal as in everyone does feel it, but universal as anyone could feel it. Like in today's day and age, we split people into two different identities based on what they happen to be born with. Like, of course there's not gonna fit everyone, and that's probably the case through all gendered systems and ideas. So we just need to figure out how to find those. Like, I know the answer's out there because, like, I scratched the surface during my degree. I'm close. I'm getting closer. So I think I have found the solution to our problem. And it comes from this paper written by Pamela Geller. Now, she comes up a lot when doing the research, but I found a specific paper from watching a recording of a 2022 Archaeo Death livestream, which will be linked with the rest of my sources in the description. And what she says is, to demonstrate that sociosexual diversity has existed throughout time and space, bioarchaeologists could look for those individuals whose identities were defined by a queer status according to our contemporary understanding of the concept. Which is what we tried to do at the start, right? Presentism would ultimately undergird these efforts, which is what we found. However, rather a far more productive approach is to situate sociosexual identities and interactions within cultural historical contexts, and to understand the processes at work in their formation and reconstitution. We should basically forget everything that we know about sex and gender from today and let the data tell us what it was like in the past, in the time that we're studying. But not only that, is we should look at how these identities and the aspects of these identities are formed and what they turn into. A bit like, you know how high heels used to be for men and now they're for women? Studying that, like things like that in the past and how that transformed into the next stage of his life, essentially. Now, I did that. I tried to find papers which took this into account. And I found two. Not like two well-defined theories of gender from a different time and culture and place. Like two topics where there was maybe a couple of papers on them. This thing is like, what I did find is loads and loads of papers of saying like, well, we need to study the gender of this. We're not assuming the binary. Like this, like we should do this in the future. This is like the next step in the kind of the process, but not a lot had actually started that, at least not a lot that I could find. So this is very much like the level of the archaeological theory that we've got to now. Right, I found those two topics. One was that I'm just gonna like insert it here. But that was basically a sexless or genderless society, which would make sense since it was very close to like hunter-gatherers of the time, I'm pretty sure. My knowledge of that isn't the best. But again, that's not a concrete theory, that is a couple of papers, a couple of ideas. The other one was that there's this Mesoamerican goddess that, although there was a pretty serious gender binary within the civilization and the society at the time, the goddess actually showed expressions from both genders. The conclusion of this paper was that gender is only for mortals. This specific goddess had either transcended it or just it didn't matter or was both. Now those are the only two examples that I could properly find. There was a lot of papers talking about third gender and gendered spaces, specifically talking about third genders, which is not necessarily what we want to be doing with this approach, but that was more talking about eunuchs, shamans, even Amazons and the Valkyries, that kind of societal role, like the Vestal Virgins, that kind of thing, which they take a gendered role that is just outside from the norm. So yeah, I think that's as far as our archaeology research can take us. The good news in this, though, is if you want to get into archaeology and you care about, like, trans studies, there's a lot of work for you to do. Like, you're never going to be bored, so that's a good thing.